Hello. Welcome back to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Lomelin, and today I want to talk about something that took me many years to understand: silence. But not the kind of silence that feels like rest, not the kind of silence you choose because you need a moment to think. I want to talk about the silence we use to survive, because there are silences that aren't peace, they're protection. And I think for a very long time, I didn't understand the difference, because not everyone who stays quiet is okay. Sometimes silence is strategy, it's control, it's survival. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I have been that person. The one who says, I'm fine, while carrying far too much. The one who keeps functioning even when they're emotionally exhausted. The one who thinks, I don't want to worry anyone. I don't want to be a burden. I don't have the energy to explain all of this. And I wonder, how many times have you said, I'm okay, simply because you didn't have the strength to explain the truth? How many times have you smiled while falling apart inside? How many times have you changed the subject because saying what you were really feeling felt too heavy, even for you? How many times have you convinced yourself that staying silent was easier than risking being misunderstood? So the third episode of this series is called The Silence I Use So I Don't Fall Apart. Because today we're going to talk about that kind of silence. The one I use when I feel like if I start talking, I won't be able to stop crying. So you know what to do. Get comfortable, grab your coffee, your cafecito, your glass of wine, or a cold beer, and get ready to chismear with me. And I think many of us learned very early in life that some emotions were more acceptable than others. You could be happy, you could be grateful, you could get good grades, work hard, help others, be responsible, be the mature one, be the one who solved problems. But being sad, angry, disappointed, exhausted, those emotions were harder to show, because those emotions made other people uncomfortable. So we learned to stay quiet, and not because we didn't feel deeply, but because we didn't know what to do with everything we were feeling. And I want to ask you something. Who taught you that you had to be the strong one all the time? Was it your family? Was it a relationship where your emotions always seemed like they were too much? Was it a friendship where you were always the one listening, but there was never space for you to speak? Was it an experience that taught you that expressing pain wasn't safe? Or did you simply realize that the world celebrated the version of you that could handle everything, but didn't know what to do with the version of you that was tired? Because so often, silence isn't born from pride. It's born from exhaustion, from having tried to speak before and not feeling heard, from crying in front of someone and feeling rushed to move on, from expressing a need and then feeling guilty for having it, from hearing things like, it's not that big of a deal, you're strong, just keep going, don't cry, everything happens for a reason. And even though those words weren't always spoken with bad intentions, they taught us something very dangerous, that our pain needed to become smaller in order to be acceptable. And little by little, we started editing our own experiences. You started saying, I'm not that sad. It didn't affect me that much. I can handle it on my own. Other people have it worse, until eventually we reach a point where we don't even know what we were truly feeling anymore, because we've spent so much time trying to be the version of ourselves that makes other people the most comfortable, that we lose touch with the part of us that needs care. And if I'm being honest, I think I learned this very early on. I learned to be strong because I felt like I had to be. I learned to keep going even when I was exhausted. I learned how to take care of other people, to listen, to solve problems, to show up. And for a very long time, I thought that was what strength looked like. I thought that because I could carry so much, I meant I was okay. But the truth is, many times I was simply surviving. There were moments in my life when everyone saw a capable Jessica, a Jessica who worked, studied, led, supported others, built programs, and navigated difficult conversations. And while so many of those things brought me purpose and fulfillment, there was also a version of me that was exhausted, a version that wanted to say, you know what, I can't carry everything today. This really hurt me. I don't want to be strong for a little while. I need someone to hold me too. But saying those things felt difficult. Because when you spend a long time being the strong one, you start to believe that you'll disappoint people if you show them that you have limits too. So what do? What you learn best. You smile, you work, you help, you keep moving forward, while quietly storing away small heartbreaks in places no one else can see. And I want to ask you something. Do you remember the first time you decided to keep something important to yourself? Do you remember the moment you thought, it's not worth saying? No one would understand. It's better if I keep this to myself. Maybe you were very young. Maybe it happened after an argument. Maybe it happened after someone minimized your pain. Maybe it happened after loving someone deeply and feeling like what you needed was too much for the other person to give. And without even realizing it, you learn to translate your needs into silence. You learn to cry in private, to process things on your own, to answer, I'm fine automatically, to change the subject when someone got too close to what was really going on. And you survived, because that deserves to be acknowledged too. That silence helped you get there. That silence did the best it could with the tools it had. And you don't have to hate the version of yourself that learned to stay quiet. That version was trying to protect you. But maybe, just maybe, the person you are today doesn't need to survive in the same way anymore. And that's a difficult question, because if we let go of silence, what do we do with everything we've been carrying? What do we do with the sadness that never had space? With the anger we learned to hide behind productivity? With the disappointment we disguised as independence? With the fear of needing other people and having them leave anyway? And I don't have all the answers, but I know this. Being strong shouldn't mean suffering in secret. And the fact that you've learned to carry so much doesn't mean you have to keep carrying it alone. Because even the most resilient people need rest. Even the people who hold others together deserve to be held. And even the people who have survived so much deserve spaces where they don't have to prove that they can handle everything. And maybe that's the invitation today. Not to tell your entire story, not to explain every wound, but to allow yourself to ask, with honesty and compassion, what part of me has been asking for help in silence? And if that part of you could speak today, what do you think it would say? And there are certain phrases that seem harmless, things we say without thinking twice, things other people probably wouldn't question. But many times there are sophisticated ways of saying, I'm not okay. Phrases like, I'm tired. It's nothing. I'll get over it. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. Other people have it worse. It doesn't matter. I'm used to it. And I want you to think about this for a moment. What phrase do you use when you're really not okay? Maybe it's, I've just been really busy, when the truth is you're emotionally exhausted. Maybe it's, I just need some space, when what you actually need is to feel supported without having to pretend that you're fine. Maybe it's, I'm okay, don't worry about me, because you become so accustomed to taking care of everyone else that asking for care feels uncomfortable. Or maybe it's, I don't even know how to explain it. And the truth is, maybe you do know. It just hurts too much to put it into words. Because naming our pain makes it real. And sometimes we convince ourselves that if we don't name it, maybe it will disappear. If we stay productive enough, busy enough, helpful enough, strong enough, maybe eventually we'll stop feeling it. But pain doesn't work that way. It doesn't disappear simply because we ignore it. It doesn't leave because we minimize it. And it doesn't heal because we compare it to someone else's suffering. Instead, it settles in. It settles in our bodies, in the tension we carry in our shoulders, in the exhaustion that sleep doesn't seem to fix, in the tears that surprise us over something small, in the places where sometimes we're just angry, in the numbness that makes it hard to recognize ourselves. And over time, these phrases become automatic. We stop saying them to protect other people, and we start saying them because we've convinced ourselves they're true. It's not that bad. I should be able to handle this. I don't have a reason to feel this way. I'll deal with it later. But later turns into weeks. Weeks turns into months. And sometimes months turns into years. Years of carrying grief that never was acknowledged. Disappointment that was never processed. Anger that was never expressed. Needs that were never voiced. Because somewhere along the way, many of us learned that having emotions were acceptable as long as they weren't inconvenient, as long as they didn't interrupt their responsibilities, as long as they didn't make other people uncomfortable, and as long as we could keep functioning. But functioning isn't the same thing as healing, and surviving isn't the same thing as living. So I want to ask you something. What phrase do you use when you're hurting? What words have become your armor? What responses comes out automatically when someone asks if you're okay? It may be an even more difficult question. What would happen if just once you answered honestly? Not with every detail, not with your entire story, but with the truth. Actually, I've been struggling. I'm more overwhelmed than I've been admitting. I'm trying my best, but I'm tired. Because maybe healing doesn't begin when we finally have all the answers. Maybe it begins in the moment we stop abandoning ourselves through the words we use. The moment we stop minimizing what hurts. The moment we stop apologizing for being human. The moment we allow ourselves to say, this matters because it matters to me. Because your pain doesn't have to earn the right to be acknowledged. And you don't have to prove that you're hurting enough. You don't have to justify why something affected you. And you don't have to keep translating your suffering into phrases that makes it easier for everyone else to hear. Sometimes the bravest thing we can say is, I'm not okay right now. And sometimes that's where healing begins. And there is something very strange that happens when you become the strong one. Everyone assumes that you're okay because you always solve things, you always help, you always show up. You're the person who answers the hard calls, the one who organizes, the one who calms everyone down, the one who finds resources when no one else knows where to start, the one who listens without judgment, the one who remembers all the birthdays, the one who asks, did you eat? The one who sends a message like, let me know when you get home. The one who somehow always knows what to say when someone else is falling apart. And very few people stop to ask, who holds the person who is always holding everyone else? Because when you become the strong one, people stop wondering if you're also breaking quietly. They start seeing you as someone who can always handle everything. And eventually you start believing it too. I know what it feels like to walk into a space and offer support while you are quietly struggling to keep yourself upright. I know what it feels like to sit across from someone who needs hope and you find the right words, while internally you are trying to convince yourself that you will be okay too. And I know what it feels like to sit with other people's darkest moments while carefully hiding your own. And I know what it feels like to respond, I'm fine, when what you actually want to say is, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this on my own. And maybe you know that feeling too. Maybe you are a mother or a father, and you have learned to place everyone else's needs before your own. Maybe you are a daughter or a son, and you had to grow up too quickly because someone had to be responsible. Maybe you're an older sister or brother. Maybe you are a friend, the one who is always available, the one who listens to 10 minutes voice notes, the one who shows up with coffee, advice, or a hug. Maybe you work in a helping profession and you spend your days holding heavy stories, sitting with other people's pain, helping others find their way back to hope. And still, when you get home, there is a silence waiting for you. Because even those who dedicate their lives to caring for others still need a place where they do not have to be strong. And I want to ask you something. When was the last time someone genuinely asked how you were and you answered honestly? Not with a whole, I'm fine, I'm tired but managing. Not with, I've just been really busy, but with the truth. With the answer you might be afraid to say out loud because it would mean admitting that you have limits too. That you break too, that you need to, that there are days when you are exhausted from being the version of yourself everyone expects you to be. Because many times we don't even know how to answer that question anymore. We've become so used to being everyone else's emotional support that when someone offers us that same space, it feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable. We deflect, we change the subject, we make a joke, we minimize what we feel, and we say, it's not that serious, and we move on. But here's a harder question. One I don't want you to answer quickly. I want you to sit with it. When was the last time you asked yourself that same question? And not, what do I still need to get done? Not, what is everyone expecting from me? And not, what problem do I need to solve next? But instead, how am I really doing? Am I sad? Am I disappointed? Am I resentful? Am I tired? Am I running on autopilot? Am I surviving at the expense of myself? Because there is a huge difference between being alive and being present in your own life. And I think many of us have been surviving for so long. We didn't even realize it became our normal. We keep showing up. We keep working. We keep achieving. We keep smiling in photos. We keep celebrating small wins. While a quieter part of us keeps whispering, I'm tired. I need rest. I need someone to take care of me too. And that part of you deserves to be heard. Not after you collapse, not after burnout, not after everything falls apart, but now. Because being strong does not mean abandoning yourself. It does not mean ignoring your needs. It does not mean disappearing inside the responsibilities. Real strength can also look like this: asking for help, crying, saying, "Today I just can't," admitting something hurt, accepting that you do not have to carry everything alone. And if you are that strong person, the one that everyone turns to, the one who always seems to have an answer, I want to remind you of something today. You were never meant to be a shelter for everyone else while standing outside in the storm yourself. You deserve to rest too. You deserve support too. You deserve spaces where you don't have to prove anything, where you can walk in and say, "You know what? I'm not okay today." And someone responds, "Thank you for trusting me with that. You don't have to carry it alone." Because even the people who hold the world for others need a place where they can finally put everything down. And there are so many sentences that get stuck inside us, words that never quite make it out, things we rehearse in our minds but never say out loud. Things like, "I need help. This really hurt me. I'm tired of being strong. I don't know how to keep doing this. I wish someone could just notice that I'm not okay without me having to explain it." And even though we know that no one can read our minds, there is still a part of us that deeply wants to be seen, without having to translate ourselves, without having to justify our pain, without having to make it easy for others to understand, just seen fully. And I want to ask you something. What is something you needed to say years ago that you are still carrying inside of you today? And you don't have to answer it out loud, but I want you to sit with it for a moment. Let it surface gently if it wants to. What conversation are you still having with yourself because it never happened with the person you needed it to happen with? What apology never came? What truth stayed stuck in your throat? What need was never expressed because it felt too risky, too heavy, or too much? Maybe it was, "I wasn't okay with how I was treated." Maybe it was, "I needed you to stay." Maybe it was, "I was hurting more than I knew how to show." Or maybe it was simply, "I needed you to see me." And not just the version of you that was easy to love, but the version that was struggling, the version that didn't have it all together, the version that was quietly asking for help in every way it knew how. Because sometimes the hardest part is not what happened to us, it's what we never got to say about it. The words that stayed suspended in time, the emotions that never found a place to land, the moments we moved on from externally but never fully processed internally. And over time, those unspoken things don't disappear. They turn into heaviness, into tension in the body, into overthinking, into replaying conversations that can't be changed, into silence that feels familiar but not necessarily peaceful. So I want to slow this down with you for a moment, not to fix it, not to resolve it, just to acknowledge it. There are parts of your story that still deserve a voice, even if that voice is only yours right now, even if it's quiet, even if it comes out of fragments, even if it's just a whisper you are finally allowing yourself to hear. Because naming something internally is still a form of truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is often where we begin to come back to ourselves. So what is something you needed to say years ago that you are still carrying inside of you today? And what might begin to shift if you finally let yourself acknowledge it? Because yes, silence can protect us. It can keep us functioning. It can help us get through moments that feel unbearable. It can help us survive situations we didn't have the tools to fully process at that time. But silence also has a cost. And it doesn't just disappear once it has served its purpose. It accumulates. It settles into the body. It becomes insomnia. It becomes the anxiety that shows up without explanation. It becomes exhaustion that rest doesn't seem to fix. It becomes that constant feeling that you are surviving but not really living. And slowly, without even noticing it, you become so used to carrying everything on your own that receiving help starts to feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, even unsafe in ways you can't even explain. Because when you've built your life around being the one who holds it together, being held can feel like losing control. And I want to ask you something gently, but honestly. Is your silence protecting you, or is it isolating you? Is it still serving the person you are today, or is it just repeating a survival strategy from a time when you didn't have other options? Because what helped you survive at one point in your life is not necessarily what will help you heal now. And that can be a very difficult realization, because we don't always recognize when a coping mechanism has outlived its purpose. We just know that it feels familiar, we know how to function inside of it, and we know how to disappear into it, and we know how to keep going with it. But healing often begins exactly where familiarity ends, and in the uncomfortable space of doing things differently, of letting someone in, of speaking what was once too heavy to say, of admitting that you don't have to keep doing this alone in order to be strong. And maybe the hardest part is realizing this. You were not meant to carry the same survival strategy forever. You were meant to grow beyond it, to evolve beyond it, to outgrow what once kept you safe. So maybe the question is not whether your silence is protecting you, but also what would it look like to no longer need it in the same way? And I want to clarify something. This episode is not an invitation to tell everything to everyone. Being vulnerable needs safety, it needs trust, it needs spaces where you are not punished for being honest, where you are not dismissed, where you are not being told you're too much. But maybe today you can do something small, something quiet, something honest in a way that still feels manageable. Maybe you can say, you know what, I'm not having a good day. Maybe you can send a message that says, do you have the space to listen right now? Maybe you can write a letter that you never sent. Not for anyone else, just to get it out of your body. Maybe you can let yourself cry without apologizing for it, without rushing to stop it, without telling yourself you shouldn't feel this way. Because sometimes courage doesn't look like big dramatic change. Sometimes it looks like honesty in small doses, like letting one truth exist without immediately minimizing it. And I want to ask you something else. What would be different in your life if you stopped carrying everything in silence? Not just for a moment, but as a pattern, as a way of being with yourself. What would change in your relationships, in your body, in the way you wake up in the morning, in the way you breathe when no one is watching? And maybe an even more important question is, what would you need in order to feel safe expressing what you actually feel? Not what is convenient, not what is expected, but what is true. Because sometimes we don't stay silent because we don't know what to say. We stay silent because we haven't yet found where it is safe to say it. And that matters. So take your time. There is no rush, just small steps, small truths, small acts of coming back to yourself. Because you don't have to rebuild your voice all at once. You just have to begin allowing it to exist again. And as always, I want to recommend a book, and it's called Wintering by Catherine May. And it's about those seasons in life when we are doing everything we can to keep going, but internally we feel exhausted. And I think it connects deeply with this episode because so often the silence we use so we don't fall apart comes from exactly that place, exhaustion, from having held too much for too long. And this book reminds us that maybe we are not failing. Maybe we are simply going through a winter. And winters are not something we rush through. They are something we move through with patience, rest, and a lot of compassion for ourselves. So I definitely recommend it to you. And before we wrap this episode up, I want to invite you to do something. If you're in a safe place to do so, close your eyes for a moment and take a breath. Inhale. Exhale. And sit with this question. What part of you has been using silence to survive? Is it the part that learned that crying was a sign of weakness? The one that discovered it was easier to say I'm fine than to explain everything that was happening inside? The one that had to grow up too fast? The one that got used to being the person who takes care of everyone else but never learned how to be cared for? The one that stopped asking for help because once it did ask and didn't receive what it needed? And I want you to hold that version of yourself with gentleness, because that silence didn't appear out of nowhere. That silence had a reason, and it was trying to protect you. It was trying to prevent more pain, more rejection, more disappointment, more loneliness. And for a long time, it may have done exactly what it needed to do. It helped you get here. It helped you survive. But maybe the person you are today no longer needs to carry everything the same way. Maybe the part of you is tired of pretending it can handle everything, tired of minimizing what it feels, tired of being strong even when no one asked it to be. And if you could sit next to that version of you, the one who learned to stay quiet, to stay safe, what would you say? Because if I could sit with that version of myself, I would say this. Thank you for doing the best you could with what you had. You don't have to prove you are strong all the time. You don't have to do this alone. You are not a burden. Your emotions deserve space. You don't have to earn the right to receive support. You don't have to wait until you break to ask for help. You deserve to rest. You deserve to be held. You've done a good job, Jessica. Don't be so hard on yourself. Because I think we often confuse strength with silence. We believe being strong means enduring more, feeling less, needing less. But maybe real strength looks more like this. Recognizing when we are tired, admitting when something hurts, allowing someone into the places we've been holding everything together alone. Understanding that our humanity does not reduce our worth, that our needs do not make us difficult to love. And maybe healing isn't always about speaking louder. Maybe healing is about stopping the punishment we place on ourselves for having needed to survive. Maybe healing is about honoring the version of ourselves that did everything it could to get us through, while we learn new ways of living, ways that we don't have to hide, where we can say, today I need support, today I'm tired, today I can't do it all, and still feel worthy of love, care, and belonging, because the goal was never to become people who never break. The goal was to remember that when we do break, we also deserve company. So before this episode ends, I want to leave you with one final question. If you no longer had to prove to anyone that you can handle everything, how would you treat that person you are today? And maybe that answer is the beginning of something different. In the description of this episode, you'll find the Amazon link with the complete list of books mentioned in No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet, from the very first episode all the way to today. And don't forget that every Friday there is a new episode waiting for you. The final episode of this series is called If Someone Heard This, They Would Understand Everything. And I think this is the episode I'm most afraid to record because there are things we learn to explain very well. And then there are other things that get stuck in late night thoughts and messages we never send and conversations we only have with ourselves. And this episode is all for that. For the words that get stuck in your throat, for the times you said I'm fine because you didn't know where to begin, for the goodbyes that never had closure, for the versions of you that did the best they could with what they had. And it's not an episode about finding perfect answers. It's an episode about stopping the weight of carrying so many explanations, about saying, even if just once, this is what really happened to me, without minimizing it, without justifying, without trying to make others understand it in order for it to matter. Because sometimes we spend so much time trying to be understood that we forget to listen to ourselves. And maybe liberation is not always about everyone understanding our story. Maybe it's about stopping the ways we hide it from ourselves. Because what would you say if you knew that for the very first time someone would truly listen to you? So next week we close this series with the most honest confession of all. It's not an explanation, it's not a defense, it's not a list of reasons to justify who I am or the decisions I've made. It's my liberation. And maybe if someone heard this, they would understand everything. So don't miss it. You were listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Lomelin. Until next time.